Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, a new day in Syria. Rebel forces who ousted Bashar al-Assad's regime seek to build a functioning government. We get the Biden administration's view on the seismic shift.
The future of the Syrian people is going to depend on the choices that they make.
A person of interest is arrested in the manhunt following the shooting death of United Healthcare CEO in New York City.
And in his first network TV interview since winning the election, President-elect Trump lays out his agenda on the border, tariffs, and potential political retribution.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. After 13 brutal years of war, Syrians breathed free today in Damascus and most of the nation after the fall of the autocratic Assad dynasty.
Bashar al-Assad and his family are now in Russia, which extended them asylum. The lightning-fast seizure of the nation by insurgent forces over the last 2 weeks rocked the region and the world. But for many Syrians today, the task after the fall of Assad was to take stock of the catastrophic damage done by over 5 decades of their rule and what the future holds. Nick Schifrin starts our coverage.
In free Damascus today, the foot soldiers of revolution celebrated the birth of a new nation. And a new generation that will barely know a ruler named Assad. Syrians who've known nothing but Assad called today victory, and flew the flag of the Syrian Republic, now the flag of free Syria.
This great and glorious day is the new Independence Day of Syria.
People are delirious with happiness here. Yesterday was a great day, and we are waiting for the country's children to return home to enjoy it.
The country that millions fled, now tens of thousands of cars, tens of thousands of families returning to their homes. Even if those homes no longer stand. Yasser Shadada and her husband haven't seen their destroyed neighborhood since the war began.
Now, after 13 years, we are back and the joy is overwhelming. Thanks to Allah, we are home again.
For nearly a decade, this was Syria's map. The opposition in green cornered in Idlib province in northwest Syria. The Kurds, backed by the U.S., in yellow in the northeast. The regime and its allies in red, with pockets of desert controlled by the Islamic State in purple. It was redrawn in just 10 days, the opposition sweeping through Aleppo, Hama, and Homs, and seizing Damascus with barely a shot fired. U.S. officials say their top concern, keeping those ISIS pockets frozen. Yesterday, the U.S. launched a large air raid into Syria, bombing 75 different targets described as ISIS meetings and training. Syria's neighbors are worried about instability, and Israeli officials told PBS NewsHour that ground forces in blue entered Syria for the first time in more than 50 years to create what they call a buffer zone in what has been demilitarized territory along the Syrian border. Israel also targeted suspected chemical weapons sites and long-range rockets to prevent them from falling into rebel hands. Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the Golan Heights and took credit for ousting Assad.
This is a historic day in the history of the Middle East, a direct result of the blows we inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, the main supporters of the Assad regime. This created a chain reaction throughout the Middle East of all those who want to be freed from this regime of oppression and tyranny.
Oppression was an Assad family affair. Hafez al-Assad and his son Bashar ruled the country for 52 years. He and his wife Asma claimed to be Syria's stylish, modern future. But in 2011, as part of the Arab Spring, pro-democracy protests swept through the country. Assad unleashed a brutal crackdown that triggered civil war and left cities in ruins. Half the country, more than 6 million people, fled their homes, desperately making a dangerous journey by boat because the land was no longer safe. But so many, including 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, never made it, this image becoming the icon of fear and flight from Syria. Those who stayed to fight and whom the regime caught disappeared into Saidnaya, a notorious military prison outside Damascus. Some were tortured so severely, the only word he can say today is Arabic for Aleppo. The prison, the crucible of Assad's cruelty, the bodies that embody Assad's brutality. Now Assad stands no longer. His legacy smashed, his stature diminished. His army retreated, hollowed out by years of corruption and defections, and Assad's previous saviors, Iran and its allied militia Hezbollah, and Russia, unwilling and or unable to save him. Syria's new apparent leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, better known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, met today with the prime minister. Julani vows a smooth transition and moderate governance to respect minorities. But he and his group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, are designated by the U.S. as foreign terrorists. Whether they govern for all Syrians, whether this country splinters, is unknown. But for now, these Syrians enjoy a new day of freedom and hope the future brings peace. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
U.S. officials say they are closely monitoring the situation in Syria, where 900 U.S. troops are still stationed, mostly in the country's northeast. John Feiner is the principal deputy national security advisor, and I spoke with him moments ago. John Feiner, welcome back to the NewsHour. President Biden said yesterday that the sudden collapse of the Syrian government under Assad is a fundamental act of justice, but he said it's a moment of risk and uncertainty for the Middle East. What are those risks, and what is the administration doing to mitigate them?
Well, Jeff, let's just not lose track of the opportunity side of this before we get to the risks. And the opportunity here for the Syrian people is to have their first experience with a government free of oppression in many generations, after 13 years of just an excruciating, violent civil war. That is the opportunity that presents itself by the fall of Assad. The risk, of course, is that the groups that toppled Assad, some of them have their own checkered history with human rights abuses, with violent extremism, with terrorism. Now, many of those groups are saying that they have changed, that they have reformed. Many of them are saying the right things in the current moment, as the president pointed out yesterday, but we'll be judging those groups by their actions, by how they deal with this new moment of responsibility that's been brought about. And I think the future of the Syrian people is going to depend on the choices that they make.
The leader of Syria's rebel offensive, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, he is said to have evolved from his past as a hardline jihadi extremist. What's the current U.S. assessment of him, and are the terrorist designations of him and his group still warranted?
Those designations very much remain in place because those designations are based on actions, not just on words. And so the United States is going to be assessing in real time the choices that these groups make and that their leaders make. Again, we've seen some of the comments made by Julani and others, some of which we found to be constructive, but it's going to take a lot more than constructive comments to bring about a better future for the Syrian people, a future that includes a government that is inclusive, that's represented by all of the major, that represents all of the major communities that make up Syria's population, and they've got a lot of work to do to get to that point. The United States will be supportive of that process as it plays out on the side of the Syrian people.
On Saturday, as rebels raced toward Damascus, President-elect Donald Trump posted on social media, "This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved." What is the U.S. interest in Syria, in your view?
Well, the U.S. has a number of interests in Syria. First of all, the United States fundamentally believes that the people of Syria deserve a better future than they have had to endure over the course of both the recent civil war and generations of tyrannical rule before that. But fundamentally for the United States, there is still a terrorist threat in Syria. There is an ISIS threat in Syria that the United States has deployed troops to address, and including, by the way, taking strikes just yesterday to continue to suppress that threat, as we have successfully done now across successive U.S. administrations. The United States has partners and allies inside Syria, Kurdish groups that we've worked with over a period of years. The United States has partners and allies on the borders of Syria, Israel and Jordan and Iraq and other countries whose interests we are going to try to work with them to uphold. So the United States has a number of interests that converge in Syria, and we're going to stay engaged. But where we agree with what President Trump said is that does not mean the United States should be deploying militarily to engage in the conflict that ultimately led to the toppling of Assad.
I want to note for our viewers that background noise, the construction happening there at the White House. It is, of course, a very busy time at the White House. A follow-up question, though. Has the Biden national security team been able to convey those views and coordinate, for that matter, with the incoming Trump team, not just on Syria, but on a range of pressing matters from the Middle East?
So on the national security side, we have been able to engage in conversations with the incoming Trump national security team. I won't get into the details of those conversations, and I wouldn't say they go as far as coordination, but we are keeping them informed of these situations as they unfold.
Assad and his family have been granted asylum in Moscow, as we understand it. What does accountability for Assad, who was a brutal dictator, autocrat, what does accountability look like right now for him?
Well, we certainly believe that Assad should be held accountable for the crimes that he perpetrated against the Syrian people. Certainly there has been, as the president said, a measure of justice delivered already by the sheer fact of his removal from office summarily, and the fact that he was forced to get on a plane and fly out of his own country, where he has spent his entire life as part of the ruling family. So there is a measure of accountability in that. We'd certainly be supportive of more. I suspect the Russians will have a different view of what Assad's future should look like, so I'd direct your questions to them, but we would be all for Assad being held accountable further for his crimes.
Finally, this is a rare moment of hope for the family of journalist Austin Tice. He's been held in Syria since 2012. Does his family have reason to be optimistic? I mean, is there an opening here potentially?
Well, I should say I have known Austin Tice's family, his mom and dad, for now more than 10 years, and had the occasion to meet with them recently, as I have a number of times in my current job and previously. These are good people who have been put through just an extraordinarily terrible set of circumstances, and obviously nobody has suffered more as a result of this than Austin himself, who's now been missing in Syria, held captive in Syria for 12 years. It is our belief, our assessment, that Austin is alive in Syria, and we are going to be doing everything we can to reunite him with his family. Beyond that, we don't have further information to provide at this point, but we are very much seeking information about his whereabouts because he deserves to come home.
John Feiner, Principal Deputy National Security Advisor for the Biden administration. Thanks again for your time this evening.
Thank you.
For more perspective on the collapse of the Assad regime and the opposition that's coming to power, we turn now to Morhav Joujati. He's a distinguished visiting professor at the U.S. Naval Academy and the former chairman of The Day After. That's a nonprofit organization that's been working toward building democratic institutions in Syria. Morhav, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I just want to start with your reaction as we've been watching these scenes unfold in Syria, people cheering in the streets. What has that been like for you to see?
I am absolutely elated. I'm elated just as the Syrians inside Syria and the Syrians outside of Syria. This has been a tragic moment for the Syrians for the past 50 to 60 years of martial law, of tyranny, of imprisonment, enslavement, torture. This has been really a murderous regime that is corrupt and that has put Syrians through a lot. And so 60 years later, imagine, suddenly we are free. The Syrians are free. So it's a moment of total elation.
Also a moment of great uncertainty because we don't yet know what comes next. When you look at the promises made by this leader of HTS, al-Jolani, what do you make of his pledge to build a pluralistic, tolerant society?
I don't simply go by his pledge. I go by the history of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the organization that he dominates in the province of Idlib, where they have now an experience in governance, where he has allayed the fears of minorities, where he has not imposed hijab and so on women. So I go by these things in addition to the fact that very recently he has communicated with the elders of the Alawites, the sectarian minority.
That had previously backed the Assad regime.
That backed the Assad regime. And they are on board with him, and this is extremely significant. Recently, he has nominated the Cardinal of Aleppo to be mayor of Aleppo, and the Cardinal declined because he doesn't want to be in a political position. Sunday, the church bells were ringing in Damascus. So again, he has been bending over backwards to allay the fears of minorities.
At the same time, I should ask, and you saw John Feiner mention this, the fact that there's still a U.S. terrorist designation on this group, on HTS, a precursor group, al-Nusra, did have links to al-Qaeda. And we should also point out that al-Jolani himself was the man against who the U.S. government issued a Stop This Terrorist effort, offering $10 million in a reward for anyone helping to track him down. So do you see that designation being lifted? And are we sure there are no ties to al-Qaeda that remain?
All these accusations are very true. However, Jolani did break away from al-Qaeda. He even fought al-Qaeda and he fought ISIS. And this is not only words, but there is evidence of this. So this designation of terrorism is in the past. Obviously, we should trust and verify. We shouldn't only take him by his words, but by his actions. And we will see what will happen in the days and the weeks ahead. What encourages me very much is that he is now coordinating and cooperating with the former regime prime minister in order to have a transition of all these major files, healthcare, water, electricity, and so on, to be taken to the next transitional administration so that there would be continuity in Syria's state institutions. This is very significant, and it tells us about the intentions of not only him and his organization, but the coalition of forces that joined him in liberating Damascus.
I want to ask you as well about Israel's decision to move military forces into Syria, seizing territory in a demilitarized zone there that was part of a 1974 ceasefire. They claim that it's a temporary defensive position. Some see it as a land grab. How do you look at that?
Israel has always expanded and said it would temporarily expand. I see this as a land grab. I do not agree with Mr. Netanyahu, who says that all this liberation of Syria was triggered directly by Israeli bombing, because in 2011, when there was a peaceful, popular uprising of the Syrian people against the Assad regime, and it failed. It failed because of the intervention of the Russian Air Force and of Iranian pro-militias that propped up the Assad regime. So this has little to do with the Israeli adventures in the Middle East. I think this is a land grab. I don't think it is temporary. I think Israel will remain there to stay.
And time will tell. We will see. But I need to ask you as well about the millions of Syrians who've been displaced over these many years of war. I remember myself being on that Turkish border and visiting with many of them in the camps there. Children who'd been born in the camps had never even set foot back in Syria. What do you see as their future? Will they be allowed to return home?
My dear friend, we have to only look at the footage, at the tens of thousands of refugees outside Syria, mainly in Turkey. There are 3 million in Turkey that are returning home now to reclaim their properties and to reclaim their lives and to be with their families and loved ones. They want to return to Syria, and they will, and they are certainly welcome.
Morhav Shujati, distinguished professor at the U.S. Naval Academy. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We
Thank you,
appreciate
my
your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you for having me.
Now to our other major story. Police say they have detained a man they're calling a strong person of interest in the murder of the CEO of the nation's largest health insurer, who was shot in New York City last week, leading to a nearly week-long manhunt that widened beyond the city's limits. Tonight, authorities say they apprehended 26-year-old Luigi Mangione in the brazen and targeted shooting of 50-year-old Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare.
He matches the description of the identification we've been looking for. He's also in possession of several items that we believe will connect him to this incident. How did we do it? Good old-fashioned police work.
Mangione was taken into custody after police got a tip that he'd been spotted at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, more than 200 miles west of New York.
Someone, a McDonald's employee, did something we ask every American to do. If you see something, say something, but most importantly, do something. And they did.
Police say they found Mangione with a firearm that was consistent with the one used in the murder, complete with a suppressor. The NYPD said it was a ghost gun, not licensed and not manufactured, but made with parts that could have been printed by a 3D printer. Police also found multiple fake IDs, a passport, and a 3-page document full of writings that they said spoke to his motivation and mindset. Last week, investigators confirmed they found shell casings at the scene, inscribed with the words delay, deny, and depose, words often associated with the ways insurance companies deny claims. Police said the document they found today revealed more about Mangione, but they provided few details.
It does seem that he has some ill will toward corporate America.
New York police say detectives are on the way to Pennsylvania and are working to bring Mangione back to New York to face charges. It ends a 6-day manhunt that sent police scouring New York City and following a trail of surveillance images looking for the killer, including this one showing a man in a black hooded jacket and surgical mask in the back of a cab that police say headed to the George Washington Bridge bus terminal. Thompson's murder ignited a wave of public feelings online and elsewhere, including anger and resentment toward insurance companies and, in some cases, a lack of empathy for his death. Following Thompson's killing, United Healthcare reinforced their headquarters in Minnesota with new fencing and a heightened police presence. And several news reports say that handwritten document that Mangione was found carrying criticized healthcare companies and suggested violence as the answer. And that part of the story, the connections to the healthcare industry, has touched a nerve, sometimes with ugly results in the days since his murder. For more on that, we're joined now by Nicholas Florco, staff writer at The Atlantic, who covers healthcare and wrote the recent piece, Murder is an Awful Answer for Healthcare Anger. Thanks for being here.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And first, we want to acknowledge that Brian Thompson was a husband, a father, a colleague to many. And so much of the rhetoric online regarding this issue is really just morally corrupt, depraved, abhorrent. And you write of the wave of public sentiment that we've seen. You say this: Americans' zeal for the death of an insurance executive demonstrates both the coarsening of public discourse and the degree of rage many Americans feel over the deficiencies of the U.S. healthcare system. So what do you think this anger reflects about the current state of the system overall?
Well, first, I want to agree with you that we should all agree that murder is abhorrent and it's not something we should be cheering about. But I think this anger comes from the fact that our healthcare system largely results in people paying a huge amount of money out of pocket. This country has a medical debt problem. There's statistics that show a significant portion of folks have to forego medical treatment to pay for other bills because of the cost of healthcare. And it's those issues that are really, I think, causing people to react really viscerally to this murder.
Well, the other thing you write about, you say that denying claims is a feature of the healthcare industry. It's not a bug. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a for-profit system. For better or worse, we depend on insurers to make decisions on whether care should be paid for or not paid for. And we can have a debate over whether insurers are too aggressive in those policies and are denying too many pieces of medical care. But the reality is, even our most notorious, famous public insurer, Medicare, they deny claims as well. It is part of the system. It's just a question of whether insurers are abusing that power.
So what are the real-world results for people who experience a denied claim?
I mean, there's a few different ways that somebody can approach it. I mean, folks can pay the bill, which could result in you wiping out your entire savings. You could try to fight that claim and appeal it, maybe go to court. That, again, is also going to largely drain your savings if you actually have to go to court. Or you go into medical debt. Those are really the only ways out of the system at this point, and that's why people, I think, feel so powerless.
Well, even after major reforms, it's clear that lots of people feel that the healthcare system isn't working for them. How does our system compare to other developed nations?
Well, most other developed nations do not rely on private health insurers to provide their health care. They have a single-payer system. And I mean, that is the biggest difference, is we depend on companies like United Healthcare to provide our health care.
What else is driving up costs for these companies?
I mean, every part of the system is driving up costs in some ways. I think a really illustrative way to think about this is like a prescription drug. So say somebody goes to a pharmacy and they're told they have to pay $200. The insurer is going to tell you that is the drug maker's fault because they set that cost for that drug. And it is true. They could lower the cost of that drug, you'd pay less. But if somebody with insurance goes into a pharmacy and is told to pay $200 for a drug, that means that they have skimpy insurance. It means that either they're being told they have to pay a co-insurance, which is a percentage of the drug cost, or maybe they have a deductible where they have to pay the entire amount until their insurance kicks in. So it's everyone who's at fault.
So what are some of the potential fixes that could mean fewer denials, better coverage, and cheaper care?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I don't think we've actually gotten there yet.
Even after all of the political capital that was expended on Obamacare, still we haven't figured it out.
It's important to note that Obamacare did strengthen patients' abilities to appeal these denials. That was supposed to be a big piece of this, and honestly, that is one of the more powerful things that patients can do to fight back against these issues. There are proposed fixes, like the doctors' lobby, the American Medical Association. They've been pushing for reforms to something called prior authorization, which is one of these tactics that insurers use. Those arguably could help, but I don't think we've gotten to a place here where we've fully figured out how to make this private system work and not also create a lot of pain for the folks that have to pay.
Were you surprised by the reaction that we witnessed online after the shooting death of the CEO?
Yes and no. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that. I think we're sort of used to, at this point, discourse on X, formerly Twitter, being a bit toxic at times. Folks seem to be empowered to say what they want to say on those platforms that they wouldn't say in public. But, I mean, when I wrote this story, the amount even of vitriol that I got just for saying we shouldn't be calling for murder of CEOs was astounding. People are furious. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I sort of expected some toxicity around the edges, but it is widespread right now on that platform.
It's an indictment of the times in which we live. Nick Florko, thanks so much.
Of course, thanks for having me.
We start the day's other headlines with the latest problems with the military's V-22 Osprey fleet. The Pentagon is temporarily pausing flights of the aircraft after weakened metal components were found following a near crash in New Mexico last month. The latest incident bears similarities to the crash off the coast of Japan in 2023 that killed 8 service members. And it comes amid ongoing concerns over the Osprey, which has been plagued by safety issues during its 3 decades of flying. The Biden administration is banning 2 known carcinogens found in a variety of everyday products and services. Today's announcement from the Environmental Protection Agency includes a total ban of the highly toxic TCE. It's primarily used in industrial settings as a metal degreaser, but TCE is also in some household items like cleaning wipes, stain removers, and glue. The agency also restricted consumer and commercial use of what's known as PERC, a common solvent used in dry cleaning. Both chemicals have been linked to liver, kidney, and other types of cancer, as well as damage to the nervous and immune systems. More than 3/4 of the land on Earth got drier in recent decades. That's according to a new report released at a UN summit in Saudi Arabia, where nations are working to address the loss of once fertile land. The UN calls the shift an existential crisis, which will mean more drought and less land that can grow food and sustain plant and animal life. The report finds that some 5 billion people will be impacted by drying land by the end of the century. Scientists place the blame on emissions from burning fossil fuels.
From observations, we can see that global warming has been the main factor explaining the aridity trends observed in the last decades. Precipitation is not changing very much at the global scale.
Separately, European climate scientists say that the Earth just experienced its second warmest November on record. The report from the climate service Copernicus is just the latest evidence that this year will likely be the hottest ever recorded. That would mean back-to-back years of record heat following the all-time highs set in 2023. South Korea's Justice Ministry has banned President Yoon Suk-yeol from leaving the country following his attempt to impose martial law last week. Authorities are investigating Yoon for rebellion and other charges amid allegations that he tried to consolidate power and use the military to block legislators from voting the martial law down. Protesters have maintained a presence outside of parliament, calling for Yoon to resign. South Korea only turned to democracy in the 1980s, and activists say they are committed to defending it.
I am well aware democracy in South Korea was not achieved easily. Our history says so, and it is something that our parents devoted their tears and blood to achieve. I am here today because I cannot sit idly by while watching it crumble.
Yoon survived an impeachment vote on Saturday after his allies boycotted the proceedings. He has apologized but refuses to step down and says he will leave it to his party to decide what happens next. Merriam-Webster has selected polarization as its word of the year. It refers to a very specific type of division. In the current landscape, polarization has become nearly synonymous with political discord. The dictionary itself defines it as, quote, a state in which the opinions, beliefs, or interests of a group or society no longer range along a continuum, but become concentrated at opposing extremes. The word was first used in 1812 in the Journal of Natural Philosophy. More than 200 years later, it is more relevant than ever. The sports world is buzzing after news that Yankees outfielder Juan Soto has agreed to a record contract with crosstown rivals, the New York Mets. The deal is reported to be worth $765 million over 15 years. That would work out to more than $1 million per home run if he's able to keep up his 2024 output for that whole time. Soto's deal tops the previous record held by Shohei Ohtani, who signed with the LA Dodgers last December for $700 million over 10 years. Soto is a four-time All-Star who hit 41 home runs this year as he helped the Yankees to reach the World Series. On Wall Street today, tech stocks struggled after China announced an antitrust investigation into American chipmaker NVIDIA. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 240 points, or about 0.5%. The Nasdaq dropped more than 100 points, retreating from its recent record. The S&P 500 also pulled back from its all-time high. And it is the end of an era for Taylor Swift's 2-year blockbuster of a concert tour. The pop superstar wrapped up her record-breaking Eras tour with a final show in Vancouver this weekend. In total, Swift performed 149 shows in over 50 cities across 5 continents. More than 10 million people saw her perform. That is roughly the population of Sweden. Along the way, she raked in a record $2.2 billion with a B dollars in ticket sales. That is about double the amount Coldplay reportedly took in for a similar stretch of shows for its Music of the Spheres tour. And in a touch of class behind all that cash, it's been reported that Swift gave nearly $200 million in bonuses to her tour team. That includes truck drivers, caterers, security personnel, and her dancers, among many others. Still to come on the NewsHour, a Marine veteran who put a homeless man in a fatal chokehold on the New York City subway is acquitted. And an East Los Angeles arts program works to give addicts and ex-convicts a new life.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Over the weekend, President-elect Donald Trump sat down for his first formal interview since winning a second term in the White House. Trump spoke to Meet the Press about his plans for his new administration, doubling down on campaign promises around mass deportations, threatening political rivals, and praising January 6th insurrectionists. Laura Barone-Lopez has been following all this and joins us now. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
So he has made clear that he plans to implement mass deportations early in his next administration. What did he say about that and other plans for immigration?
So when it comes to mass deportation, Amna, the president-elect said that he would deport entire families.
I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Even kids who are here legally?
Well, what you going to do if they want to stay with the father? Look, we have to have rules and regulations.
According to Pew Research, Amna, that action could impact an estimated 4.4 million U.S. born children under 18 who live with an unauthorized immigrant parent. Now, Trump also said that he wants to end the 156-year-old right under the 14th Amendment to birthright citizenship.
Can you get around the 14th Amendment with an executive action?
We're going to have to get a change. We'll maybe have to go back to the people, but we have to end it. We're the only country that has it.
Now, it's false, Amna, that the U.S. is the only country that has birthright citizenship. Some 36 countries have it as well, including Canada and Mexico. But how would he do this? Trump has said during the campaign trail and during statements that he could go around Congress with an executive action directing agencies to require that at least one parent be a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident for a future child to be able to get automatic citizenship. He would also direct agencies to stop issuing passports and Social Security to people born in the U.S. Many constitutional scholars, though, have said that this would require a constitutional amendment through Congress, and that's the only way this could change. Of course, if he tries to take an executive action, he would face lawsuits, which could then lead to the Supreme Court. Lastly, I'm going to just very quickly, Trump also said that he would allow dreamers, those children who were brought here illegally as minors, to stay in the U.S., but during his first term, he tried to eliminate that program, and the Supreme Court stopped him.
He's also previously said that he would pardon the January 6th rioters, those who violently stormed the Capitol back in 2021. What did he say about how quickly he would move on this, and also anything on prosecuting his political rivals, which he's mentioned before?
The president-elect said that on day one, he would be looking to pardon these January 6th rioters, saying that he would act quickly, Amna. And he also accused lawmakers who worked on that House January 6th committee that investigated the insurrection. He said that he thinks that they should be thrown in jail, and he accused them of committing crimes.
Cheney was behind it, and so was Benny Thompson and everybody on that committee. For what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think?
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
President-elect Trump said that he would leave it up to his Attorney General nominee, Pam Bondi, as well as his FBI Director nominee, Kash Patel, to ultimately decide if they want to investigate the people that he was talking about there, or if they want to investigate President Biden or others. But those nominees have made clear, Amna, that they want to investigate the investigators and go after anyone they consider an enemy of the president-elect.
They covered a lot of topics in this interview. What else stood out to you?
The president-elect was asked about medication abortion and whether or not he would restrict it. At first, he said no. And then when pressed on if he would fully commit to not restricting it, he said, quote, things change. Also, his comments on tariffs, Amna, he talking about the broad tariffs that he wants to implement on goods being imported from other countries. He said that he cannot guarantee that Americans will pay more.
Laura, we've talked before. A lot of news organizations have reported on the challenges of interviewing President-elect Trump because of the frequency and the volume of many of the lies he puts forward. It's what's well documented during the campaign season as well. How did NBC handle it in this interview? So
NBC initially put out an edited interview that added some context. They also released a transcript, and then they ultimately released the entire full unedited interview. But during the interview itself, Amna, there was very little to no fact-checking, very little to no pushback in real time as Donald Trump was repeating falsehoods that he made during the campaign trail, as well as outright lies.
Well, Laura, while we have you, I want to ask you about things on the transition front in the incoming Trump administration. His embattled pick for defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, was back on Capitol Hill meeting with senators. What do we know about that?
Pete Hegseth met with Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. She's a veteran. She also sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. She is a key vote here, Amna, and she said in a statement today that Hegseth, that she is going to work with Hegseth during this process and that she believes he should have a, quote, fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources, referring there to the sexual assault allegation that Hegseth faced in 2017, as well as the multiple reports that detail intoxication across his jobs. That is the biggest sign to date, Amna, that Senator Ernst is potentially moving closer to supporting Hegseth, and that's a welcome sign for Trump's team because they were really looking to her, hoping that she would back him because they believe other senators will follow her.
There's news on another nomination front. Today, more than 75 Nobel laureates signed a letter urging senators not to confirm Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. That is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What should we know about that letter?
So the laureates say that Kennedy has, quote, a lack of credentials across science, medicine, as well as administration. And they warn in the letter that Kennedy, quote, would put the public's health in jeopardy and undermine America's global leadership in health sciences. And they specifically cite his opposition to vaccines like the measles and polio vaccines. They also cite the conspiracy theories he's promoted on successful treatment for AIDS and other diseases. Now, the laureates who signed on to this, Amna, include a cancer researcher, Harold Varmus, Eric Kandel, who was a pioneer in cognitive neuroscience, as well as Carol Greidner, a famous molecular biologist.
All right, that is our White House correspondent, Laura Barone Lopez, covering it all. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
A jury in New York City today found Marine veteran Daniel Penny not guilty in the chokehold death of Jordan Neely.
The death, which took place on a subway car last spring, has provoked intense reactions. Some are painting Penny as a savior who protected people. Others see him as a reckless vigilante who went too far. Stephanie Sy has the details on the verdict and the case.
Jordan Neely was a homeless man who struggled with mental illness. On the day he died, he entered a crowded subway car yelling that he was hungry, thirsty, and ready to die or go to jail. That's when another passenger, Daniel Penny, took him to the ground in a chokehold that lasted for almost 6 minutes. When Penny let go, Neely was unresponsive. He was later pronounced dead at a hospital. The verdict brings an end to a closely watched trial that touched on questions around public safety, mental health, race, and homelessness. Neely's father spoke moments after the decision.
I just want to say I miss my son. My son didn't have to go through this. I didn't have to go through this either. It hurts. Really, really hurts. What are we going to do, people? What's going to happen to us now? I had enough of this. The system is rigged.
Penny did not speak afterward, but his lawyer later said that he, quote, finally got the justice he deserved. Joining me to discuss the case is Samantha Max, public safety reporter for New York public radio station WNYC. And Samantha, you have been covering this trial. Thank you so much for joining us now. Going into this, we knew that New York City's medical examiner had ruled that Penny's 6-minute chokehold on Neely caused his death. Help us understand how the jury could have arrived at this acquittal.
So Penny was charged with 2 crimes, manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. He couldn't have been, in any case, convicted of both. They kind of spoke to different mindsets, but basically the prosecution had to prove that Penny not only directly caused Neely's death, but also that he knew or should have known that he could have been putting Neely's life in danger and that he wasn't justified in his actions. So ultimately, at least one of those factors, the jury felt enough doubt that they decided they could not find him guilty of those charges.
Daniel Penny's defense was that he was protecting himself and other riders, and both sides actually agreed, I understand, that he didn't intend to kill Neely. The jurors were all regular subway riders, where safety, of course, is never far from mind. How did that factor into the trial?
The subway really was central to this whole case. During jury selection, everyone was asked how often they ride the subway, so the people who were deciding this verdict were also regular subway riders. And throughout the trial, we heard from many different people who were on the subway that day, many who had been riding the subway for years or even decades, often, many, many times a week. And they were saying that they had witnessed outbursts before, but that there was something that was different about this one. There were several people who were really genuinely afraid and who said that they were relieved when Penny held Neely in a chokehold. And then there were others who, especially those who, once the train pulled into the station and watched Penny continue to hold Neely for about 6 minutes, that they felt uncomfortable with how long he was holding on. And those were the people who tried to intervene unsuccessfully.
Penny is a former Marine who happens to be white. Neely was a homeless Black man with a history of mental health hospitalization and a traumatic childhood. Samantha, how did the histories and identities of these two men add to the weightiness of this trial and the ways in which it was politicized nationally?
I think it just really added a lot of layers. On Neely's side, this was coming at a time when there was a huge debate already happening in the city about mental illness and homelessness, especially after the pandemic. And so many people who are struggling with mental illness or who are unhoused have really been in the subway system very visibly. And then on the other hand, you have Daniel Penny, who's a former Marine, and he really went into the spotlight in his own way. There was a legal defense fund that was set up that garnered more than $3 million in donations. You had big conservative names like Vivek Ramaswamy joining into his defense. And also both of his defense attorneys are former military. So it really became just this very political case on both sides.
Following up on that, Samantha, after the verdict was read, there were reportedly some cheers in the courtroom, and there had been some anger when Daniel Penny was charged. Is there a sense of vindication among his supporters? And on the flip side, for Penny's critics who said it was vigilantism run amok, is there concern that this verdict leads to more of that kind of thing?
I think that is the unpredictable question. We actually just were speaking with Penny's defense attorney, who was saying that, this is a huge relief for his client and that he thinks that his client was a hero and that he acted with justification. We have had other instances of self-defense in New York City, some famous cases on the subway. Some people might think of the name Bernie Goetz. There was also, shortly after Jordan Neely was killed, there was another person who was involved in an incident and stabbed someone to death on the subway and was not charged because pretty quickly prosecutors felt that he was justified. So, I think if these things come up in the future, prosecutors will always be evaluating on a case-by-case basis. But I do think it sends a message to people who were perhaps concerned about, what could happen when you step in, that perhaps this will make them feel more empowered to do so, for better or for worse.
Samantha Max with WNYC, thank you so much for your reporting and for joining us.
Thank you.
Changing lives and creating art. Special correspondent Mike Saray looks at a tried and true program in East Los Angeles and the forces behind it. It's part of our arts and culture series, Canvas.
It's beautiful, huh, Alyssa?
One of Fabian DeBoer's first art commissions was this mural on a neighborhood grocery store in East Los Angeles, while a recovering drug addict on probation.
There were times when I was sick and my addiction that Don Miguel would give me a job opportunity, paint my store, paint the letters here, paint some flowers there, just to keep me in the art, also away from doing stealing or anything.
Today, he's a celebrated Chicano muralist and this year's recipient of a National Endowment of the Arts Heritage Fellowship.
Art is a powerful tool. It can make you or it could break you.
A survivor of the all too familiar East Los Angeles cycle of a challenging childhood due to immigration, drugs, gangs, and family incarceration issues, Art has been Fabian's escape to a much different life for himself and his family.
Every time life will seem hard and dark or I would feel out of place, I will go under a coffee table and I will begin to create my own worlds to escape my reality. That's when I found art to be more than just a gift. It was sort of like a big brother.
He also discovered a guardian angel in his parish priest, Father Greg Boyle, who encouraged him to stick with his art and defended him in juvenile courts.
Father Greg just kept accepting, embracing, and receiving me regardless of where I was at in my life. No matter what, he never shut the door.
Father Greg Boyle went on to create Homeboy Industries, where Fabian worked along with other gang members, addicts, and ex-cons, searching and working towards a new life. Starting with an industrial bakery and retraining program, a popular cafe that expanded to one at the Los Angeles International Airport, and a free tattoo removal service. Homeboy Industries has become the country's largest gang intervention and reentry program. Fabian DeBoer got Father Boyle's blessing and Homeboy Industries' support to fulfill his dream of running his own art academy and support group.
Once we do that, think about where you're at in your current life now in this moment, because every day is a new beginning. You could always turn the page, or we can dwell in the past and suffocate. So today we're turning the page.
The Homeboy Art Academy is Fabian's art studio and vehicle for sharing his passion for art with former gang members and parolees like he once was.
So if you think about the traditional arts practices and how art brings people together in creativity and community, it's always been a healing method. Art has a universal language that can be embraced by anyone. And in this, the arts helps drop the defenses.
Shankar Davis, on parole for a hit-and-run charge, is learning how to make and design custom T-shirts.
Keep scoring. My website's called Keep Scoring Code. Because in this life, you got to keep going. You just can't stop.
So is Keep Scoring the name of your fashion business now?
Yeah, that's my business.
Okay. Had you had your sewn or silk screen before this?
Never. I never touched a sewing machine. I never touched a silk screen. Never.
When growing up, graffiti art, there's the 80s. Hip-hop culture, was at its best. So graffiti art is what I was attracted to as another form of expression. Although graffiti art was also considered vandalism.
Father Boyle helped make Fabian's graffiti art street legal by setting him up with an internship with Los Angeles' premier street muralist. The Getty Museum included Fabian's work in their Black Book exhibit of graffiti artists called The Book of Friends.
Chicano art is not just a movement, but it's also a form of activism. And Chicano art allows us to convey messaging and amplify the voices of our people. And we don't come with restrictions when it comes to Chicano art. We don't fall for what is art and what isn't art. We paint, create, and amplify the voice of our people. And that is the beauty of Chicanismo, of Chicano art.
So growing up in East Los Angeles, you didn't have any formal training. You had no reference for the Baroque Renaissance art.
To me, it's important to utilize those themes, in the Baroque Renaissance style, because they are elegant, they're glorious, these paintings, but yet the people can relate to it.
His latest exhibition featured his interpretations of the 16th century Italian painter Caravaggio, known for his intense and often violent realism.
The way I relate to Caravaggio is because of his lived experience and my lived experience. There's a lot of commonalities there, being oppressed and suppressed for the person that he has become. He was considered a thug. That's me. So then how do I take Caravaggio imagery or storylines and reground them and connect them back to my community? And maybe next I challenge Michelangelo. That's just the way I'm thinking right now.
Why not?
Why not? And that's my next move. And if I have all the Sistine Chapel books and Michelangelo books there, already doing my research.
So you're ready to take the Sistine Chapel, bring it to East Los Angeles?
You'd be surprised, and I hope that you come to see the outcome of this body of work.
walking the talk is still very much the homeboy way, and Fabian DeBoer's art keeps him climbing for the sky. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Mike Saray in East Los Angeles.
And a quick note before we go, there was a lot of news in tonight's program, and so we did not have time for our usual Politics Monday duo of Amy Walter and Tamara Keith.
But fans of that weekly segment should fear not. They will be back next week. And remember, there's always a lot more online, including some tips for giving back and volunteering during the holiday season. You can see that at pbs.org/newshour.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thanks for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.